and add a unique sonic signature, that's the way that things really start to sound cool. And if you think of like old punk records where the recording medium was crap, but they sound cool and aggressive and they sound authentic and they sound punk rock because it's not this beautiful, big, lush thing. And timely, Red Hot Chili Peppers just released a record and they did it all to tape and then mastered it directly from the tape. And so
I haven't heard it yet, but yeah, I want to.
I haven't heard it either, but supposedly that's a great record. People are saying it's their best record since Blood Sugar Sex Magic, right?
Yeah.
I go back farther than Californication. I like Californication, but it got a little mellow for me. I preferred the rapping stuff on Blood Sugar Sex Magic, but that's
I
just
get
taste.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Californication just came out like at a time in my childhood where it was just like a formative moment,
Yeah,
I think it came out in like the late 90s. So I was born in 87. So it was like as I was becoming like, I don't know, like puberty or whatever.
Yeah. Speaking of funny formative memories, I remember the first time I heard Rage Against the Machine in the car on the way to school. This friend of my brother's named Dave, and he had this little van and he picked us up. And my mom gave him gas money and he picked us up and took us to school. And I will never forget him drumming on the steering wheel. And that was the first time I ever heard Rage Against the Machine, and that, man, talk about your brain exploding. It was that was a formative thing. And the groove and the rock and the drops and like, man, what a great time.
So good. That record's awesome. Wait, so we're talking about the vocal textures. It's interesting how everything kind of makes everything smaller. And I've been seeing Craig Bauer posted about this recently about like, compression really just makes things smaller, not bigger. And it's like all the things we do are making things smaller, kind of. But then
it's true.
You're able to bring it up, I guess,
Well, when you're optimizing the recording medium, you can put it to better use. So that's not just about effects and EQ and compression. It's also phase rotation. And that's something I've been really digging into lately. And it's become a huge part of my process is Isotope 9 RX Advanced, and I'm sure other versions as well, have a really great phase tool.
Oh, really?
And there's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple things on that phase tool that I use a lot. One of them is it can suggest the correct phase rotation based on averages. So imagine turning the throttle on a motorcycle. It grabs the audio and rotates the phase. And then there's another function there called dynamic phase rotation where it goes, I would imagine, transient for transient and rotates each thing.
No shit.
And this opens up a really fascinating realm of possibilities because if you can optimize the waveforms and the transients in the waveform without losing RMS, then you've optimized the digital medium with which we're recording on for every task. So in doing so, if you can reduce transient without losing RMS, and if you can reduce transient without an imparting of compression volume automation, you don't have a sound change. The signature hasn't changed, and you've reduced the transient without having to lose anything at all. And you're just basically free.
Gain a bunch of volume.
Yeah. Well, and without any artifacts of compression. So phase rotation can be really powerful. Now, if you really consider that the ones and zeros on the line on the screen is the compression or rarefaction of the speaker cone, literally. So at a certain point, now this is a shout out to not only Jack Joseph Puig, who talked about with me a lot about this. So one of the experiences we did at Mix with the Masters is he took the speaker and laid it on its side. So the speaker cone was straight up in the air. And he took a dime and he set the dime inside the speaker cone. And then he played it and he had I forget what he used to do it, but he had an experiment set up with probably 2 different kick drums and a bass, something like that, right? And when it was all in phase, that coin was bouncing up in the air. And then he flipped the phase on something and the coin was rattling on the cone. It was no longer jumping. And it was a very good visual lesson because when any single lower lows, mids, low mids, anything in the bass area is out of phase, the speaker cone throw doesn't know how to go. Because this is the whole thing about nullification, right? Yeah. So in phase null, you actually have both things happening at full volume, but they cancel each other out and you get the zero and the speaker didn't know how to handle that, so it just doesn't play anything. So this same exact thing happens in mastering when we over peak limit or we over clip something. The speaker literally can't recreate the waveform. And so the speaker cone distorts in the exact same manner as a guitar amplifier. So not only do we battle digital distortion, but we also battle physical distortion of the speaker cone for the end user, which is why it's really important to have a great mastering engineer on your side, because they should be listening for that and have a system set up that can show them. Because it's one thing to have a perfect 32-bit float internal, never going to clip system. But if your record goes out to somebody and their system just goes the minute they play, it's dead, right?
You're over. Yeah.
So it's really important to be mindful of phase in a recording, in a mix. And to that point, this isn't an invitation to go and phase rotate dynamically every single element in your record. There's an art to that, like there's an art to everything else, and I'll give you a head start on that. What I realized is if you have multiple signals coming from the same source, so like 3 mics on a guitar amp, obviously you can't do this to each guitar mic because you would then change the phase and how they play off each other, which could be comb filtering. So you kind of don't want to get in too deep and screw with it in the individual level, because if I've got something that sounds good, I got 3 mics in a guitar amp and it sounds good, then don't screw with it. But that sum to mono, screw with it. But if you've got doubles of that part, don't screw with it, or you have to screw with them both exactly the same. So in this sense, if you have only one bass guitar on your record, dynamic phase rotation on the bass guitar, as long as you don't hear any artifacts, is great, because there's no other bass that's going to phase cancel against.
Got it.
But if you have 2 acoustic guitars and it's the exact same hand positions, exact same microphone, exact same mic pre, exact same player, exact same chords, and it's a straight double, you ever had that issue where, and usually electric guitars is where this happens, hard pan one to the left and hard pan one to the right, but you start hearing phantom center because the parts are so tight, our brain interpolates it, right? Yeah. So we think it's a phantom center source. And so a big part of that, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, is you got to change your instrument, change the pickups, change the – my guitar player is great because he'll capo and play the whole thing up in a different capo position. The core fundamental harmonic structure of this is no longer the same, less likely to some phase mono. Easiest thing to do is shift the pickups. If that's not good enough, keep a secondary guitar in your studio. And if you're doing 2 Les Paul overdubs, change Les Pauls to another Les Paul. They don't have the same wood. They don't have the same pickup, same strings. It won't phase cancel. So let's say it's 2 acoustic guitar parts recorded on the same microphone. You have to rotate them the exact same amount. So pick a leader, have RX suggest what the phase rotation should be, apply it, render it, suck the other guy up, don't suggest, rotate it the exact same. Now they're in the same phase alignment together that they were when you recorded them. Because if you rotated one and not the other, they're no longer in phase alignment. They'll start to get washy and weird. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's so interesting, the choosing of where to do the I mean, because I've heard people talk about the Sound Radix plugin, Auto Align.
Great.
And this sounds
plugin.
And this sounds even more detailed. And people's complaints were that, on the air, at least what people told me, was that like they don't necessarily choose the right phase relationship for that instrument in the song and that part or whatever. Like,
so real quick, Auto Align is for multiple mics on one source. So I only use Auto Align on drum kits. I prefer Melda Audio's Auto Align, so M Auto Align. And that has not only does it have the timing that Sound Radix Auto Align has, but it also has a phase wrap. So it'll go in and it'll say, oh, not only are they now that they're in time, this whole section is out of phase. And so it'll wrap it and give you a perfect phase between the 2 microphones. So for 3 guitars on a mic cab, I'll reach for Melda Auto Align before I reach for Sound Radix. But on 12 mics on a drum kit, Sound Radix is much more dialed in for that. I mean, it still works, but Sound Radix only does 180 degrees of phase rotation. So you're not going to get the effect of
really?
Sound Radix Pi is their dynamic PI phase interactions. That's different. Now that's, again, reading your phase and it's dynamically rotating, like turn the button with your left hand, right? And so there's the 3 sets, very powerful. Sound Radix is for horizontal and 180 degree polar timing, polar phase and horizontal timing for a drum kit. Mm-hmm. And then I would use M-Auto Align for multi-mics on a single source that are, if you've lined them up well, they're probably only going to be one sample different. You don't need a grand change for that. But you want the phase wrapping, which is really cool. And then if you want to mess with Sound Radix Pi, I really like that, but I don't like it on sustained sources because you can hear the phase rotate and it sounds like a weird snip. But on drums, there's no sustain on a drum kit because the drum sustain is like room tone and you don't hear it, especially when there's a bunch of guitars in front of it. So I recommend Sound Radix on drums, both Auto Align and Pi, and I typically use Melto Auto Align on guitars or anything else. I would put multiple, not necessarily bass because I'm not putting multiple mics on bass usually, but I make country music, so my bass is typically DI. So that's a different kind of
Same
thing.
here, by the way. I'm a DI bass. I'm a bass player, and I just go DI these days.
Yeah, and now all of this is for internal phase. Then I will align all of these with Isotope RX to the canvas, which is what we were saying earlier.
Got it. Okay, so this is like the gestalt of the production.
Well, and then this is just what I would think of as engineering, because you haven't even gotten into mixing yet. This is just prepping your audio files, paring down mics, making sure everything's perfectly in phase. And then you go through and then you're like, okay, great. Now my production arrangement is properly prepped, color corrected, if you will. Now it's time to
get balances.
Yeah. And do the actual mixing, which is the next level of art in and of itself. Now for me, 99% of the time I'm mixing my own productions. So the line blends. I don't typically treat it as mixing as a phase. As I add each element, I'm mixing that element to the whole, and then at certain stages, I'll go do a final mix. But that's another conversation. So I do mix for people sometimes still, but only when they come to me and ask. It's not a service I like try and generate sales leads for. Primarily, my business is full service production plus mixing.
Yeah, and then you have your mastering engineers that you trust.
Yeah, I can master, but objectivity is lost. If I could perfectly master in this room, then I wouldn't need anybody because my monitors were so perfect and the room was so perfect that everything I do in here translates so perfect, you wouldn't need a mastering engineer. So the way I treat it is I will master records, and I say in parentheses, make it loud, for clients who don't have extra budget to do that, which is a lot of them. But for the clients that are really making a show of this and they're really making a go of it and they're like, I'm going to release this on the world stage and I want to be a star, I always recommend a third-party mastering engineer because you need something objective in a room that's better than yours.
Yeah, I'm with you. Mastering engineers, they can hear better than you can. I mean, ideally, and then give you the comfort that it's done.
Yeah. Well, you don't even have to give them the credit that they can hear better than you are, because most people who are good are good. The difference is that usually a great mastering engineer, someone who's worth hiring, is in an acoustical environment that is 1,000 times better than you are, has speakers that are 1,000 times better than you are, has a S-ton of rack gear that's better than what you have, has the experience of a career and knows the process of that specialty. And so they're not better than any of us. They're just specialized. And in doing so, they're playing at a higher level than us. So it's like having that relationship. That's not to say mastering engineers aren't amazing, but we should definitely remember that we're also amazing. I don't know if that makes any sense or why I'm even saying it, but like,
yeah. I mean, it's about the communication and that you can voice your opinions to the mastering engineer if you're not happy with what you got back or if they messed up your mix.
And you really should be looking for someone who has a better environment, a better listening environment that you are. Now, quick side story. There was a mastering engineer in Los Angeles that a dear friend of mine, may he rest in peace, Mike Wells, mastering. He passed away earlier this year, surprisingly, and a very, very big loss for the music industry. He taught me a lot along the way. I was using him, and I would go into his setup and he rented a room at Megatrax in the Valley, and loved going to see him. He's a big personality in the